This morning at the JSE, we invited Lesetja Kganyago, the governor of the Reserve Bank, to address a room full of chief executives, an exclusive audience with a key message: the state of the South African economy in an increasingly challenging global environment. And in an era where everybody seems to have a politician in their pockets, a guy who is in everybody's back pocket in South Africa. You carry his autograph in your back pocket whether you know it or not. Lesetja Kganyago, governor of the Reserve Bank. It's nice to have you with us. Good morning.
Thank you, Bruce.
Or good evening in this context, because it is dark and it's night time, of course. It is theatre of the mind. You launched your signature note in Molechi village in Limpopo, and I found it on Google Maps. It exists. It is a good place. But those are your origins, right?
Yep. I grew up in that village, and so when we launched the notes, I thought that all the celebrations that had taken place here in Gauteng, I could get the villagers to have something for themselves, and we decided that we will spend with the first notes in that village.
I want to talk about the real economy in South Africa, the economy that might be experienced by the people in Molechi village in Limpopo, just northwest of Polokwane, and what is happening on the global scene, because they're the global issues and then the everyday survival, bread and butter issues that South Africans face every single day of their lives. You've just come back from a gathering, a big gathering in the United States, the spring meetings. How did those go?
I think the meetings went pretty well. I think what is not in dispute is that the world economy is not in a very good space at the moment. A number of factors that we've got to be alive to. Divergent monetary policies in the advanced economies and what it means for emerging markets. Low commodity prices and what they mean for commodity exporters, including South Africa. And the issue of rising corporate debt, which is an issue for most emerging markets. Fortunately, South Africa is not in that category. And fourthly, the slowdown in the Chinese economy and what it actually means for the world economic outlook.
What's so terrifying is how fast things move. Just before Christmas, Janet Yellen and her Federal Reserve felt comfortable enough to start raising interest rates in the United States. Interest rates hadn't been raised since before the iPhone was invented. I mean, that's how long rates were going down and stayed flat for an unprecedented period of time. She raised interest rates, and everybody got terribly excited about inflation and growth in the U.S. economy. And suddenly, she's pulled back. What was your reading talking to your American colleagues as you were in the U.S. last week?
Well, I try not to read anything into what they say.
Everybody reads everything into what you say.
And I take it for what they say. And actually, yes, I don't think that people should try and read anything into what we say. They should read what we say. I read what the Americans say. I would engage with them. I think that their decisions have got implications for our economy. You would remember that when there was the issue of the taper tantrum, that there started to be a reversal of capital flows from emerging markets. In the same manner that when you had extraordinary monetary policies and QE in the US, you experienced a surge in capital flows to emerging markets. That as the US began to normalize their policy rates, you are going to see outflows of capital from the emerging market world. And in a way, you would say that the emerging economies got hit by a portfolio balance shock as capital starts to flow back to the United States. And that is what normalization of U.S. monetary policy actually means for us.
Is the world able to cope with whatever normal is? And I don't know what normal is. I've forgotten what normal is. Normal is such a long time ago. This normalization everybody talks about, because QE has been a little bit like, I assume, what a drug habit might be like, and people have got used to being fed the pills of QE over an extended period of time. It kept the world from implosion. QE is removed, and suddenly the real economy isn't performing adequately to be taken off the support.
But QE is, for all intents and purposes of now, we had seen the US beginning to raise interest rates, but QE is very much the issue now in the euro area as that economy remains weak. QE is very much the issue in Japan, and that is why we're talking about these divergent monetary policies. And I think as we are talking about normalization here, let us not think that what we had before the crisis was normal.
Exactly.
It was not normal. So whatever the new normal is going to be, we get used to that. I think that even after the US began to increase interest rates, what we should not forget, and even after the end of QE, is that interest rates remain at historic lows.
Yeah, and they do, and are likely to do so for a period of time, which is again positive for emerging markets such as ourselves. We've seen in the last 3 or 4 months something of a turnaround in commodity prices. Base metal prices are moving up. We've seen precious metal prices moving up. We've seen the reaction of stock markets to that. The bond market, I think the 10-year bond yield is down by something like 100 basis points from the middle of January. There seems to be, is it a greater level of confidence in South Africa, or is it simply this flow of capital around the world looking for emerging marketplaces to settle that is giving us maybe a false sense of security that things are turning around for South Africa?
Look, South Africa is very much integrated into the global economy. So to the extent that there is positive sentiment around the globe with respect to emerging markets, South Africa also benefits from that. But let us not forget that what we had experienced in South African financial markets, which in the main had to do with what happened in December, was overdone. And I actually believe that the South African markets do offer a lot of value. But then there have also been significant things that had taken place since the events in December. We have had a budget. And the budget had set the course of fiscal consolidation. The outcome of the revenue take at the end of the fiscal year was better than expected. Fiscal policy is getting tightened. And more importantly is that our macro framework is acting in sync. Both monetary and fiscal policy are acting in sync. And these things do not get unnoticed by global financial markets. People do notice that here is a country that faces challenges, and it's taking its challenges head on.
Now, we're in this emerging basket, the B grade, if you like, in terms of ratings agencies. We're in there with Russia, and we're in there with other emerging markets. Argentina's in there, Brazil, oh my goodness me, we're in there with them as well. Where do we fit in that emerging markets world? According to the people that you talk to, I mean, you go in, you take tough questions from investors, you take tough questions from global policymakers. What are they telling you?
And I also take tough questions from Bruce.
I haven't even. I'm warming up. You've been to gym this morning, and I've still got to get started.
Okay, so I think that what we should not lose sight of is that emerging markets. There's been this thing of emerging markets as an asset class. But the truth of the matter is that emerging markets are not homogeneous. And those emerging markets that are able to distinguish themselves from the rest get noticed. And the countries that you had mentioned, I mean, I hate doing country comparisons in public, but it's almost like the company I do not want to keep. All right. So you talked of Argentina. There is a new government now.
Yeah.
Right. But for a long time, you couldn't even trust any statistic coming out of Argentina. So you can't say we are in the same class with Argentina. We have got an independent statistical service that adheres to global standards with respect to statistics and the laws. We have got very strong institutions in South Africa, strong institutions of our democracy.
Which have proven their mettle in the last month.
Yes, whether you are talking of the courts, or you are talking of Chapter 9 institutions, or you are talking about institutions of fiscal management being the National Treasury, or you are talking of institutions of monetary policy being the South African Reserve Bank. We have got institutions, and yes, the robustness of these institutions have been tested, and these institutions had actually passed the test with flying colors. And what we then need to be saying is, what is the policy framework within which these institutions are operating, and are they living through to their mandate? And when you start to look at those things and you start comparing them to the universe that you talked about, you will actually realize that we stand out. We are a country with very strong fundamentals. And I think that when people analyze the credit matrix of a country, they tend to just reduce it just to numbers. Yeah. Growth has done this, the fiscal has done this. They forget a very important component of the credit matrix, and that is the strength of institutions in a country.
Now, that is the message that you and Pravin Gordhan, the finance minister, have been selling very actively over the last 2 or 3 months, Davos, post-Davos, and the meetings that you've been holding. Is that falling on fertile ground?
It is being well received. What is important for us here, and what distinguishes the period now with previous periods, has been the single voice with which South Africans had been speaking. It hasn't happened before that the Minister of Finance would take business and trade unions on a roadshow, and that began to say to the investor community, here is a country that understands its problems and is prepared to confront its problems. But also, more importantly, had been that for people who are in trade unions, being on the roadshow and understanding how investors think about these things. I don't know, I mean, Bruce, I've done roadshows like for 20 years, okay? And you go and you meet an investor, and there are meeting rooms, and you see that there are so many meetings taking place. Everyone in those meeting rooms is looking for one thing from that investor. They are looking for an investment from that investor. So the notion that says that you could sit here and decide what investment you take, what investment you do not take, you've got to go out there and actually realize that these investors have got choices, and you have got to pitch.
You're hustling.
You've got to pitch and say, this is who I am, this is what I offer you, and please do invest in my country.
So what is the real world result then of this wonderful roadshow, this collaboration? Are we seeing the fruits coming to the fore?
Look, I talk to investors all the time, and in the conversations with the investors, it's very clear that the South African message now is getting understood. We also do state, we are a democracy, and in a democracy there is noise. And South Africa is no exception. There will be noise in our democracy. This is a free country. You will experience that. But I think that the message is getting across. If you wanted evidence, I think that the most recent bond placement by the National Treasury, which was way oversubscribed, tells you something, that we had actually been able to get the investor community re-interested in South Africa.
Are we keeping up with adequate momentum? Are the people in this room pulling their weight? Because before Davos there was a panic. Post-Davos there were meetings held with business. Then there was the big meeting in Cape Town with the President just before the budget speech. And there was a lot of singing from the same hymn sheet, and there was lots of rah-rah, there was lots of noise. But has that noise translated into practical activity? Or have we all gone back to our day jobs in the hope that, okay, it's all done now, it'll all be fine, let's move on, and we can focus on our niches once again?
Your choice of language is very interesting, because you say was. Those engagements are continuing. And I think that what is important for us is to sort out the investment environment in South Africa. And the conversations with the business community that says, what is it that is hindering investment becomes important, and those conversations are continuing. And We are continuing to speak, importantly, with one voice. That's why I say that don't say was, it's still happening.
Good. I'm glad to hear it. So, as the National Treasury and as the Reserve Bank and as SARS, there are things within your control that you can do. The thing that nobody seems to have any control over is growth. And we don't seem to be getting South Africa's growth engines firing. And that's got to be a big consideration for all of the ratings agencies, as they maybe give us a pass in June, but they look towards December. They're going to want to see stories of growth coming through. The IMF has downgraded its forecast fairly recently, pretty much, I think, in line with your own forecast in the Reserve Bank. What are you expecting, 0.7%, 0.8% growth?
0.8.
0.8% growth this year. And we're just seeing a deterioration in the growth outlook, which is quite scary.
I think that you can say the same about the world economic outlook.
I'm worried about here, not this.
No. We are very much part of the world, and we are an economy that is integrated with the world. If the world doesn't grow, it doesn't matter how cheaply you are trying to sell stuff. If there is no global demand, there will be nothing that you would be able to sell. You would not be able to absorb that. But back to the growth story that you had actually mentioned. It's incorrect to say that growth is not something that we control. It might not be that it is within the control of the Reserve Bank or of control of the Treasury. And just coming from those meetings in Washington, people were talking about this three-pronged approach to the world economy. And I think that one is fiscal, two is monetary, and for South Africa, those two are in place. And the third, which is the more important one, has to do with structural reform.
Yeah.
And that goes to the belly of microeconomic change, the environment of business, the cost of doing business, the functioning of product markets, the functioning of factor markets. That is what we have to be coming to grips with. And
but doesn't that take tough politics? And are we in a position as a country where we can take tough, long-term political decisions to facilitate what you're talking about?
Of course, it takes tough politics. Fortunately, I'm just a central banker. This country is capable of taking very difficult decisions when nobody expects that we would be able to take.
It's usually when you're crossing the road and the bus is just here that we suddenly make the decision to have a little growth spurt.
Not just the spurt. The structural reform agenda of South Africa is captured in the National Development
Don't say captured, please don't say captured. Encompassed.
Elucidated in the National Development Plan. It is a plan that had been adopted by Parliament. We must just go and implement
How many MPs have read it? Anyway, let's move on to questions. Ladies and gentlemen, in our audience this morning, I can either pick on you, and many of you I recognize. Forgive me for those of you I don't recognize. Maria Ramos, you're going to be first because you've worked with Lesetja Kganyago for a long time if nobody else puts up their hands.
I actually think that all of us in the private sector have an equally important job to do. And what government has already said is what's different for me actually sitting in the private sector this time round is that there is such a huge awareness of how much we need to do together. I remember the discourse around the ratings, because this is not the first time that South Africa faces a ratings downgrade. It's the first time that it's come this close to a real downgrade. But I remember when we faced ratings downgrades in the past, the lack of awareness and the lack of a public discourse around the ratings downgrade. And for the first time as a nation, we have ordinary people talking about the ratings downgrade, and we have business engaging with the ratings downgrade in the way that we are engaging with it. And I think that's important for us as a nation. But I do think it comes down to something else, and the Governor spoke about structural reform and that being the topic of conversation at this year's spring meetings. You know, structural reform takes huge amounts of action, and sometimes very difficult, not just policy decision, but acting on those policy decisions. And I think that that's really where we are at the moment. And you talk about us as a nation only being able to sometimes take the decision when the bus is right there as you're about to cross the street. And I think we need to get beyond that, because we've got loads and loads of policies on the table. The National Development Plan has been adopted by Parliament. It's about action. And if we don't take those actions, we are going to find ourselves falling further and further behind as a nation in a highly competitive global environment.
How do we get to these structural reforms that so desperately need to be taken before we're forced to make structural reforms because the system is completely broken down?
I think in many instances when you make structural reforms, there will be short-term costs. You've got to be focused on the long term. But more importantly is that as you embark on structural reform, you must look after the vulnerable. And there is this notion when people talk about structural reform and say, or it might lead to job losses, and says we must protect the jobs. We should not be protecting the jobs. We should be protecting people. We should be protecting people, not jobs. Because you see, if you wanted to protect the jobs, who is going to protect the job of the Britannica encyclopedia salesman in the era of the internet? But if you protect people, you will be thinking about how do I transition this person to a new environment. And that is a conversation that you've got to be engaged with. Most instances when structural reforms fail, they would be failing because of a lack of appreciation of saying, when you are doing structural reform, there are short-term pains, short-term costs. In that process where there are short-term costs, you've got to be protecting people and allowing them to make the transition.
So when you're sitting in the Monetary Policy Committee and you're having those conversations regularly, but then formally for, is it 3 days? You do Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday still, every 2 months, and you look at the problem of inflation, and it's a nail, and the only weapon you've got is a hammer, and that is interest rates, and you're pounding this hammer with interest rates. Are you casting your mind back to the people in Lesetja village, where you launched this 50 rand note and spent some money in the village, as you make those tough decisions to raise interest rates in an environment which is hostile towards inflation?
I have to, because the decisions we make affect people. But you see, people in Lesetja don't borrow money.
How do they survive?
You see, people...
I want to go to this place.
You see, people in Lesetja... No, it's a very important point, because when we talk about the poor are not borrowers. And that is the nature, the political economy of monetary policy. When people talk about monetary policy affecting the poor and so forth, the poor are affected by inflation. Inflation eats. Inflation is the income of the poor, because in most instances they are living on fixed income.
Sure.
So you are talking of Lesetja. Many of the people there would either be retired, they would be living on social grants, or they would be relying on remittances from migrant workers who are on fixed income.
Yeah.
And as inflation goes up, it eats into their income. And so when we're sitting in the Monetary Policy Committee and you think and you say...
It makes that decision easier, doesn't it?
No. It doesn't make it easier, because those poor people do not have the loud voice that the chartering classes have, who are exposed to high levels of debt. And as such, when interest rates go up, the central bank becomes unpopular, because borrowers complain. And you know, I get lots of letters from pensioners.
How do they get them to you? The post office is broken. Anyway, sorry.
But somehow
they get through.
They get there. Some of them get hand delivered, and some of the pensioners do have emails, by the way, and the complaint about how the low interest rate environment had actually eroded their income.
Devastating.
But it is not just in South Africa. It is the same discourse, actually, that these negative interest rates in Europe and low interest rates in the US and so forth, what does that mean for the pensions industry?
But 20 years from now, what are the consequences of perpetually low interest rates? And I don't think we know yet, do we?
No, we do not. We do not know yet. But what we do know is that perpetually low interest rates favor borrowers against savers.
My question is very much about the financial inclusion. So you started touching on we have to bring everyone along. And I feel like South Africa is one of its biggest strengths is the history of innovation and this real ability to innovate. And yet I feel like somehow in this fintech revolution and financial inclusion and innovation, somehow we're not moving as fast as we could. I was in Kenya last week and I saw something really amazing. They're launching the first government bond that can be bought by retail investors on mobile phones and retraded on mobile phones. And it was really through close cooperation with the Securities Exchange, the central bank and private sector. You know, are we doing enough in this environment to do the same in South Africa? Could we do more? And maybe are there things going on that you can share that would be interesting for us?
Stia, thank you very much.
You know, South Africa has got very high levels of financial inclusion. And part of it has to do with the fact that we have got such a sophisticated financial sector.
But the Kenyans make everything easier using mobile devices.
Yes, and I'm sure we can also make it easier using mobile devices. I'm sure you can do banking on your mobile device. You know that.
You can make sure you get the decimal point in the right place. Otherwise,
well, you must get the decimal point in the right place. I sent my father money through mobile money. We have these things, and of course, I agree with the commissioner. You've got to deepen that. The thing about technology is that it lowers the cost of rolling out financial inclusion.
Yeah, I most certainly. I don't think he's answered your question this year. I don't think you're going to be satisfied with that answer. So let me prod just a little bit more. Why are we not doing enough?
What do you mean we are not doing enough? We've got financial inclusion of 85% in South Africa.
But how do you define financial inclusion?
You know, I'm glad that you are asking for the definition, because the notion of financial inclusion in South Africa, and I had spent years trying to turn around the argument that people tended to equate financial inclusion with access to credit and access to borrowing. And we've been saying financial inclusion is about giving ordinary people a transactional account for them to receive income and to do payments. That, for me, is at the heart of financial inclusion. And South Africa had gone further, by the way. We'd gone to extend these things into insurance, even into education unit trusts, to broaden financial inclusion. When will enough be enough? Enough will be. We will have enough when everyone is financially included. By the way, the National Development Plan is still setting a target of 90% financial inclusion.
Ladies and gentlemen, please bear with us. We need to take a short break and be back with you in just a moment. This is The Moneymakers. I'm Bruce Whitfield. Our very special edition shot live at the JSE this morning with a room full of chief executives and the governor of the Reserve Bank.
Just a follow-up question on interest rates. Given that interest rates have gone up 100 basis points since November, given that the rand has appreciated, and given that the demand inflation numbers for March have surprised pleasantly, and you mentioned about South Africa having value, do you think now is a good time for us to pause and see the effects of what has already taken place?
The inflation number didn't surprise us. It was in line with our forecast.
Okay,
and there is nothing we can do about yesterday's inflation. There is something we can do with tomorrow's inflation. So our focus is on tomorrow's inflation. You want to know what the decision of the MPC is going to be in May? The MPC can hike, cut, or keep rates the same.
In which order would you prefer to do it right now? but the reality is the MPC is, I think, quite healthily divided. The discussions must be very robust, because at the last two MPC meetings there's been no absolute consensus as to what the right decision is.
and the meeting before that too, and the other one before that.
But when it comes down to the vote...
no, we don't vote, we express preferences.
Oh, forgive me.
You see, what is happening is that South Africans can be assured that the MPC looks at all the facts at its disposal. And the fact that you would have different views in the MPC should actually be seen as a strength. That you are not having one person doing the thinking and the rest doing the following. That everyone is expressing views, because the science that we apply called economics is not a precise science.
No, absolutely not. Just take me through the process. Do you sit at the head of the table? And then the other governors...
The table is round.
Okay, so, so you take the role of King Arthur, and then you've got your knights around the round table. There's 6 of you.
Yeah.
And so if you get a 3-3 split,
yes,
what happens then?
We debate until we reach an agreement.
So it's like the jury system in the United States, which is not perfect.
I don't know how the jury system works. I know how the MPC works.
But you've got to have at least 4 people concurring on a decision being the correct policy decision.
Well, if we were to vote, it would have been a different ball game altogether. We took the step, because in the past what used to happen was that a decision would be made, we would debate, and a question will come at the press conference: was the decision unanimous? And we would then have to answer. We took a decision in November 2014 to start disclosing upfront what the preferences within the MPC were. We would deliberate on these things. We might have views, and if there isn't an agreement, I call for a break and I say to them, go walk, go have coffee or something, come back, let's see, are you still holding the same view? And then we deliberate. And eventually there is the discipline that at 3 o'clock somebody must stand.
Yeah, but what is the closest it's ever been? Because you've got to stand up at 3 o'clock and deliver a 20-minute speech. It goes to about 22 minutes.
Yes.
That's the average that I've seen. What's the closest?
We're trying to get it shorter.
Thank you. Why can't you make the announcement up front and then, because nobody would listen? Okay.
Yes.
What is the closest it's been to 3 o'clock, where you've had a level of disagreement where you don't feel comfortable to go and deliver the prognosis in front of the nation?
I think that the most recent MPC reflected that.
5-3?
No.
Okay.
Not that close. Because remember...
You've got to write the speech.
We must write the statement, exactly. And that statement, remember, is a record of the MPC deliberations. So it reflects the views of that entire MPC.
Has it ever gone to lunchtime on the Thursday?
What time is lunch?
1 o'clock. Pretoria, 1 o'clock on the dot.
No, in most instances, even when the thing had protracted, we tend to finish with 2 hours to spare before we can finalize.
Okay, that's interesting. It's interesting as part of the process. Wendy, you still got the microphone?
Having acceptable interest rates of 60% for the poor, this is not inclusion, this is certain death.
There we go.
You know the repo rate is 7%.
But and again, as the Reserve Bank, you don't have that authority. But what's your thinking within the Reserve Bank about exclusion on that basis?
No, it's not just exclusion; it's actually abuse. Because if we talked about inclusion being having access to something, you will say that there is inclusion. But 60% interest rates are an abuse, and so you would see that in the regulatory architecture that we are putting in place, we are saying that there needs to be 2 peaks, one focusing on the institutions themselves, which is prudential, and the other focusing on the conduct of the players in the market. And we have got to be dealing with that at that level. I mean, interest rates of 60%, it's above the usual rate, even for that matter.
It feels like we've been talking about Twin Peaks ever since that terrible TV show with the same name was on TV, and that's 20 years ago. When do we see the implementation, if you like?
Well, the bill is in Parliament, and it's being deliberated in Parliament. We have been preparing. The Reserve Bank is far advanced in the creation of the prudential peak. Once the legislation is passed, we will just hit the road running.
You find that in board meetings, we're now taking decisions that say we have to move this economy forward and therefore transformation is going to suffer. What do you say to this group of people and say, or how do you say, let us do everything together? As you said, we have to take pains in the short term so that in the long term we come out okay.
Thank you for the question.
What is the question?
The question is, we're running many processes in South Africa. There's transformation, there's gender transformation, there's racial transformation of the economy. I think the point that you're trying to make is those are almost being, to use the term around African banks, side-pocketed. As we say, no, we need to get growth going. So it's actually, let's just forget about this difficult stuff here right now. Let's get growth going. And suddenly issues of transformation, gender transformation, racial transformation fall off the radar. That's her observation. I should like a response.
I don't see how any economy can grow sustainably by trying to exclude as many people as possible. So the issue of transformation is actually at the heart of the South African growth story, because it says that if you are having people excluded, you are not harnessing the abilities that the economy should actually be exposed to. I think that let us be blunt and say that in the apartheid days, we didn't utilize all of the skills we had, and actually we deliberately tried not to utilize the skills that we have. So the transformation, you can't talk of sustained economic growth in South Africa without talking about the transformation agenda. And by the way, yesterday I was having a conversation with one of the global firms, and it has got a presence here in South Africa, and their South African operations were asked to assist the global firm on diversity, because the South African operation has got more women than any of the others do. So yes, we still have a long way to go, but let us also not forget the significant progress that we have made. South Africa has got a lot more women and black people in the boards than we had in the past, and we are actually doing way better than many countries.
She's not going to buy that answer, you know that. She's not going to be happy with that answer. But that is the answer. Thank you very much. Any more questions, ladies and gentlemen? Suddenly everybody's waking up. It's very nice. Let's get a microphone on this side, please, Monique. Thank you very much. And then, Karabo, you can pass it down to the middle over here. Adam Kraker, who I picked on right at the very beginning. He's a business consultant, and he's written a big document on growth, which he'd love to send you. And he'll ask you a question in just a moment. But you first, sir.
Thank you, Bruce. Governor, I'm Gerard Papenfuss, National Employers Association of South Africa. We're talking about inclusion of as many people as possible in the economy, but also in the world of work. Our experience is that government is doing everything possible to keep people out of jobs. High wages, collective bargaining structures that is structured in such a way that small businesses are marginalized. Jobs are protected. It's difficult to dismiss. Employers are discouraged from employing. And we see the result of that. So we can do whatever we want, but if employers don't want to employ, they will not employ. That's one defense mechanism that employers have, is if they don't want to employ, they will not employ.
A question, please.
The question is, are you frustrated by it? Are you telling them that you are frustrated by it, and do they hear you?
That's 3 questions. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Hannah.
You know, one of the constraints of the South African economy is the insider-outsider problem. We talk a lot about small to medium-sized enterprises. And then you've got to be asking, what does conduct of policy mean for small to medium-sized enterprises? It becomes a very important thing. In 2006, the OECD did a study of structural constraints in South African markets. And it actually established that the problem of labor markets and the problem of wages in the South African economy stems from the product market problems. What does that mean?
Please.
What it means is that big business and big labor are able to reach a collective bargaining agreement, extend it to the other players, and thus by so doing inhibit competition. Now, the notion that says that we are just creating jobs, or we must be creating jobs, I actually would like to turn it on its head. I wouldn't ask anyone here in business, who amongst you wakes up in the morning and say that I'm going to my office to create jobs? You create businesses, and because you have created businesses, jobs get created. So
are we focusing on the wrong kind of jobs? Anne Bernstein at the Center for Development and Enterprise is on a mission right now, done deep-level research, and at its very core, any job is better than no job, and no job is the scenario that far too many South Africans find themselves in. Do we need to get any job at any rate in South Africa, or do we need to stick to the agenda of decent jobs, decent pay? Because that's not including nearly enough South Africans into the network. I think that's roughly the point that Gerard is trying to make there.
Look, I think that we've got to be alive to where we come from. We do need the jobs. And you're right, you're saying that we must try and create as many jobs as we can. But back to the issue that we were talking about, we wanted financial inclusion. Does it mean that you allow abuses because you wanted financial inclusion? The same issue goes with labor. The fact that you want jobs, would you tolerate abuses in the workplace because you want to create any job? And I don't think that is what we are talking about. And I don't think that that is what the gentleman was raising either. He was not promoting abusive practices in the workplace. What he had raised, which is is the costs to small businesses of maintaining the jobs that they are having. And that is a very important conversation for us to have.
Is one that you are having?
Well, you know that my job is to worry about monetary policy, and the stuff that I've talked about structural reform. That is where this conversation has to be taking place.
But is the Reserve Bank participating in that conversation at that level? Saying we need the structural reform. Here's somebody called Gerard who's concerned, and he's talking about jobs, and we've got Anne Bernstein and others talking about jobs. Are you part of that conversation, or is it out of your mandate?
Well, government is in that conversation. We are not quite part of that conversation because we have got a responsibility that we have been tasked with. Do we have views about it? Of course, we will always have views as long as it is about the economy. But to protect our own independence, we do not comment about what
it's
other
the get out of jail free card. It's our independence. Adam Craker.
Governor, here we are in 2016. And I think we all understand the context of the spectre of downgrade, the economic crisis that we face, the lack of growth, the lack of trust between business and government, and the fact that, in fact, that business has got a great deal of cash sitting on the balance sheets today, ready to invest, but that's not being invested. Would you agree that it feels very much like we're back in 1993-94? And would you suggest that there are things that we can learn from what happened after the first democratic elections and the period of growth that was stimulated through investment in the country that we have never experienced before and we haven't experienced since? And are there steps that you believe that we can take to stimulate that growth again and to move forward?
Thank you. Thank you.
We are definitely not in 1993. We hated each other very much in 1993. And I think that at the moment what we are having is that we can talk to each other. We are able to put a united front and say this is what we are faced with. Businesses are sitting on cash. The cash is looking for things to invest. then we have got to deal with the environment of business. We've got to give certainty to businesses so that businesses would know that they would invest. It's one thing if I invest today and I have got one set of regulations and I'm investing for the next 10 years or 15 years or for the next 20 years, but I'm uncertain about whether regulations would change sometime in the future, and they change to the detriment of the business. You need to be able to create an environment that is providing certainty, is predictable, so that businesses would be able to invest.
On that point, I mean, you go into the spring meetings and you're having a chat, you talk about monetary policy, you talk about everybody working together, and suddenly Mosebenzi Zwane has gazetted changes to the mining charter without consulting the mining industry. Does that not undermine the message as you go in talking about this wonderful, cohesive, collaborative process that we're going through?
It makes the communication a challenge.
It's the first time I've really understood what challenge means. Thank you. Okay, good.
It makes communication a challenge. And I think that when we were there with the Minister of Finance, the Minister of Finance had to put a call, and I got to understand that there is still going to be a conversation about what was gazetted. Yeah, it poses a serious challenge to the communication.
Thank you for clarifying. Yes, sir. Question at the back as we get a microphone to you. I do want to, so inflation comes down from 7 in February to 6.3% in March. Is within your expectations. What's your expectation for the next two or 3 months in terms of inflation? I won't ask you beyond that.
Well, I'll give you beyond that because
that's very brave.
Our forecast for the year is still 6.8.
Average.
Yes, average.
So so this 6.3 is an anomaly on a higher trajectory.
Well, the April reading might be lower. It all depends on what else happens. There were a number of there were base effects in the March number, especially with respect to the transport component.
Transport fees must fall. The petrol price held.
Well, if you do not understand, the petrol price in March last year rose by 188. Yeah. 168, and now.
Is that when they put a rand on petrol?
And now. For March, the increase was like 88 cents. So those base effects start to kick in. There might still be base effects in April, but we do not focus on a month-to-month figure. That's why I give you a longer...
No, fair enough. But I mean, if your expectation remains 6.8% for the year, then to use your term, people might continue to express preferences for higher interest rates as the year progresses. On the MPC, you say nobody votes, you express preferences.
Yes, and if you wait until May, you will know what those preferences are.
I think we know already. The question, sir.
Good morning, Marlon Burgess from SARB, the South African Medical Devices Industry Association, and also American Chamber of Commerce. I just wanted to refer to the point about the National Development Plan as an engine for driving growth and foreign direct investment.
Have you read it, cover to cover?
Yes, I have, unfortunately.
Don't tell Trevor.
So I want to talk specifically about the opportunity the health sector represents. Having been recently to Malaysia and Ireland, the first thing, and this will become a question to the governor, on policy integration, because the Malaysians have a policy integration process linked to their National Development Plan, where an agency called Pamandu, I imagine is the representative of Jeff Radebi's portfolio, where these project managers sit in every ministry and monitor and evaluate the progress of the National Development Plan for that country. In Ireland, they rolled out their National Development Plan using healthcare as an engine to drive economic growth. Now it is the biggest contributor to GDP, and that process took between 5 and 7 years.
Question, please.
The question is, can we do something similar in South Africa?
I mean, it's one of the great weaknesses of this wonderful National Development Plan, because it's for everybody, but there's nobody driving it. Trevor Manuel went into the private sector. He got captured by the private sector, and suddenly everybody pays lip service to this national development plan. But the Malaysian example is a really good one in terms of actually monitoring and evaluating as the process goes and chivying people along when they fall behind. I mean, it would be a brilliant idea.
I've got no doubt that the minister in the presidency would be in the best place to answer that.
I think we just had one of those communication challenges. Could you mention, please? One last question from the floor, and then, ladies and gentlemen, we must wrap up.
I'm simply concerned, and whilst I understand on the one hand about the robustness of our institutions, we see on the other hand the groundswell of discontent and uprisings of people from squatter camps, from students. The huge number of unemployed people breaks my heart every morning when I see the beggars at the robots, and these people are destitute.
Yeah.
And I'd like to pose to the Governor a question: do we really have to wait until the world wakes up and starts creating a demand, and only at that point are we going to start developing jobs and doing things and digging more stuff out the ground and going ahead? Isn't there anything we can do now in terms of our own infrastructural spend and absorb the people and get the money flowing again? Can't we do something?
It's out of the Governor's mandate, but I mean...
can I give him a magic wand and tell me what he would do?
Yeah, sure, okay. There isn't, but I would like your thoughts on it, because that is the crisis of confidence that South Africans have in their own future. And if you've got no optimism in your own future, if you have lots of money, you have choices, and you make those decisions, and some people stay and some people go. For the vast majority of people, though, they have no choices, and the only voice they have is protest, and the only voice they have is then expressed through the ballot box. And we have an interesting 5 years ahead of us. Jay Naidu, former Minister of Communications, Jay Naidu. I'm very concerned about the exclusion from the political process of the vast majority of people, and he's worried that we could see a period of quite big instability. Big instability affects absolutely everybody in the country. It makes people in this room nervous. It makes the people that you talk to on a regular basis very nervous indeed from an investment perspective. What's your magic wand?
Well, political science is not a trade I apply. I'm an economist, but I think that the question about whether we should be waiting for world demand or whether we should be doing something is a valid one. And I don't think we should be waiting for world demand. We should be creating domestic demand that is beyond doubt. And I think that the question that was raised, or the comment that was raised earlier about the cash on corporate balance sheets, says to us that if we improve, if we change sentiment, if we change the environment of business and we get investment going again, that economic activity that would spur the creation of jobs will set in.
And that's what we absolutely need. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for taking time out of your very busy diaries to join us here at the JSE this morning. Governor, thank you for being very generous with your time this morning and coming to talk to us today. And to you at home, thank you very much for watching this very special broadcast from the JSE with the Governor of the South African Reserve Bank, Lesetja Kganyago, and a room full of chief executives. Good night.